right, I want to go over chapter 9 today. If you take a look up on the screen here, what that means is we've done the first 8 chapters. All right, getting started with PHP, variables, HTML forms in PHP, using numbers, using strings, control structures, using arrays, creating web apps. And we're going to go over this now. And you can see that it's about 2/3 of it is on cookies and the other third is on sessions. We've already gone through chapter 10, creating functions. We've gone through chapter 11 on files. So what's left after this chapter is chapter 12, which is the intro to databases, and chapter 13, which is putting it all together. So what I'm going to do right now is go over chapter 9. After I go over chapter 9, I'm going to show you an example that we're going to work on next week, because I want people hopefully to get to a certain point, and then I'll give you an assignment next week to be working on. All right, so if you are following along, I'm on page 231. Again, notice cookies, 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 cookies. So that's about the first 15 or so pages in here. And then about the last 8 to 10 pages are on sessions. All right? And as it says, this chapter discusses the 2 primary methods for tracking data, cookies, and sessions. Somebody in this class, right now, not John, somebody tell me what's the difference between a session and a cookie? There's one major difference between the two. Not all at once. And looking at your phone doesn't preclude you from answering the question. Well, you're on the right track. How's that? A cookie is written to, written basically to your machine. A server, a session is written to the server, basically. So cookies, in some ways, are less dangerous, and in some ways are more dangerous. Some of the things with cookies too. First of all, typically the max number of cookies that you can have on the system and under most browsers at any time is about 20. That's one thing. Another thing, cookie size typically is about 4K. But, and you'll read this kind of stuff if you look online enough, that over the years cookies have gotten a kind of a bad rap, that people will say that they're evil and they do bad things. They're text files. They're not executable files. What can be bad about cookies is if somehow information that's fairly confidential information gets written to a cookie. That can be bad. All right? And there's not only is there session hijacking, there's cookie hijacking. But cookie hijacking is a lot harder because a cookie is normally associated with a person's IP address. All right, so remember that as we start to go through it. Okay. Now, as always, Ullman says this, and Ullman's been doing this a lot longer than I have. But if you look down here, this is on again page 231. He says, fortunately, maintaining state is quite simple with PHP. And again, as I've said to you many times before, simple is a relative term. It's very easy to do something all your life and say that it's simple when you're explaining it to other people. All right, I marvel when I go in to get work done on my car, and I've gotten to know the mechanic fairly well because of the vehicles that I have, and when I watch him do certain things. And it's just like, how do you know that? Well, it's just after a while, you just become second nature. But then he'll do something on his computer, and I'll be, no, you're doing that wrong. What do you mean? And I'll explain it to him. He's go, how'd you know that? Because I've been doing it for a long time, and it becomes second nature. All right? So, as it says, prior to the existence of cookies and then later sessions, traversing the web was tough. All right? You could use your back button, but again, we've talked about this before, but I want to make sure you all get this. HTTP, the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, is stateless. Remember that what HTTP is when you type HTTP something followed by some address, and you type it into the address bar of a browser and you hit enter, you're sending an HTTP request. Okay? That request, ideally, if you wrote a URL in there that made sense and was a viable URL, then it'll go to some server someplace which will respond with an HTTP response. So it'll send it back, and then what it sends back has got to be converted back into HTML so that your browser can read it. Does all that make sense? All right. Well, as it says, if the server can't track a user, there wouldn't be shopping carts. There wouldn't be any way to allow people to do things when they would go to multiple pages. I've been using this Future Value app and playing around with it, quite a bit. Now think about this. Let's suppose for a second that I had this Future Value application, okay? And I wanted to do everything on one page, kind of like the way we've been doing it thus far, okay? I could use that test file that I gave you. In fact, I've got that in here someplace. Let's see, because I've been looking at different stuff today, so let's just try this. That's not the one I want to show you. So, yeah, because that's going to go to another form. I wrote this a while back, and do I have Future Value 2? No. All right, I'll have to look for it. But working on this stuff, totally lost my train of thought. Now let me just jump back here. Okay. All right. Again, if there weren't such thing as cookies, what we'd have to do, for example, in a language like PHP, is you'd have to have almost like a form on every page. So you'd have a form on one page, you could put in some information, you'd press submit, you'd go to another page. You'd maybe do something else on there, you'd hit submit, you'd go to another page. Does that make sense? The problem is there wouldn't be a way, even if you hit your back button, those two forms would not necessarily be conversing with one another and sending information back and forth to one another. So the author says, long story short, if there were no cookies, there'd be no Amazon, there'd be no Facebook, there'd be no nothing where you had an app. Every app would basically be a one-page app, all right, which would make the web a lot less convenient. So cookies are simply a way for a server to store information, again, as I mentioned to you, on the user's computer. By doing this, the server can remember the user over the course of a visit or several visits. How long? Depends on when you set the cookie's expiry date to. On most browsers, if you don't reset the expiry date on a cookie, the cookie expires 20 minutes after you log out. Everybody hear that? By default, that's what it is on most browsers. You can have a cookie immediately, all right, expire by making sure that when the user logs out, what you can do is you can take that cookie and you can set it to a time in the past. You can set it to the current time, for example, minus 60, which means have it expire a minute ago. Since that time's already passed, the cookie should then automatically expire. All right, I already mentioned this to you. They've given a bad rap because they're only text information, etc. PHP has good support for cookies. What's the biggest disadvantage of using a cookie versus using a session? Can somebody tell me that? What's the biggest disadvantage of a cookie versus a session? What can you do with cookies? Yes, but what can you do with cookies? Can't you go in here and go to your history? Yeah, you know what the hell it is in here. Next one, history. But all the stuff that's in here, all right, for instance, I can, let's see, I can clear my recent history, but there's some here in here. Can't I disable cookies? The answer is yes. In fact, if you go in like to IE and to some of the browsers, if you set your security up real high, that'll basically disable cookies. You won't be able to allow anything to be written to your machine. If you set it real low, you'll allow everything, pop-ups and everything else, including a lot of stuff you probably don't want to set up. All right, so it says, before we move on, let's mention two things about cookies. The first is how to debug cookie-related problems. You inevitably need to know how to do that, so the topic is discussed below. We'll say that in just a second. All right. Okay. So the author says here, as you begin to work with cookies, you'll need to know how to debug your cookie-related scripts when difficulties arise. Not if, but when they arise. So 3 areas it says there might cause you concern. All right. Number 1, sending the cookie with PHP. Number 3, accessing a cookie in a PHP script. And they mention here, the first and last issues can be debugged by printing out the variable values in your PHP scripts, as you'll soon learn. You already all know this. You know what this means. And we've talked about this many times before. So you know what this means, and you know what this means. All right? If you say method equals post, then everything that you send when you click the submit button goes into the $_post array. If you say method equal get, it goes into the $_get array. Sometimes when you're doing more complex scripts, you might actually be calling some stuff with post and some stuff with get. And if you don't know which is which, you can use this. Because $request holds everything that's in both of those arrays. Does that make sense? All right. There's also another one of these super arrays. Let's call that $_cookies. In fact, grabbing this, $request holds the information in all 3 of those arrays. So it holds everything in the post array, in the get array, and the cookies array. All right? And the reason that this is important is if you're not sure whether or not you've set a cookie, so let's assume, for example, all right, I tried to set a cookie. And I tried to set a cookie and I called it favorite color. All right, then I can actually come through here and I can say if is set $_cookies. Let's just say we call it fav color. That makes sense? You can check to see if a cookie's set, just like you can check to see if any bit of post data or any bit of get data has been set. The second one they say there is receiving the cookie in your web browser. All right? And it says here the second issue requires that you know how to work with cookies in your web browser. For debugging purposes, you'll want your browser to notify you when a cookie is being sent. You can do that in IE by using the way that they show here, override automatic cookie handling, and there's other ways of doing it in Firefox and in Chrome. All right, and I'm not sure either what either one of those are. And also notice the best way to debug cookies when you're using Firefox is to install one of the cookie-related extensions like FireCookie. All right, because FireCookie, like Firebug, will allow you to go in and take a look at what's inside of the cookie. Safari, as it says, on Mac and Windows doesn't give you many cookie choices, but this is a little old, this book. It's a couple years old now, so I think it's gotten better over time. So let's talk about how to set a cookie. Notice in here, this is the minimum way that you set a cookie. Right there. Now, one thing to realize, there's a set cookie. And when I get done with this, please, all of you shake your head yes that you heard this. There is a set cookie. There is no get cookie. All right? Okay. So don't try calling it because it doesn't exist unless you write your own. But when you set a cookie, at a minimum, what you need to put in is the name of the cookie and the value of the cookie. That's at a minimum. So again, I could come through here and I could do something like this. So where we've got this, I could come through here and say, let me make this a little smaller now. It's getting too large, the font. So I could come through here and say $fav color equals set cookie, and we could call it fav color green. Not my favorite color, but you get the idea. And then later on in my program, I could test for it like that. All right? Does that make sense? Yes? No? Or I could just say if is set, I can do this, or I can just say if is set $, fav, color. I could do that too. All right. It's also possible for you to put more things in a cookie than just those. In other words, just at a minimum you need the name and the value. But there are a bunch of other parameters that you can put in. As always, if you want to know, well, what are those parameters, Jeff? You go out to php.net and you type in cookie. And it should show you the different stuff that's in here. All right, so you'll notice the stuff that's here, and it's all the darker stuff. And if I click set cookie, now it shows me all the different things that I can set with it. And you'll notice the only two in here, they're even saying that it's not mandatory to put a value, but otherwise you've got a cookie with nothing in it. I don't know why you do that. You need to give the cookie a name. And I don't remember in my life ever seeing having cookies set up that didn't have these two things in there. The name and a value. All right. You can, when you set the cookie, you can tell it when you want it to expire. You can tell it where on your path. In other words, can it start from the root and work its way down, or does it have to start from the current directory and work its way down, or whatever? All right. You can say secure equals true or secure equal false. If you say secure equal true, it's supposed to send every cookie using HTTPS instead of HTTP. In other words, it's supposed to be more secure. All right. And it goes along with the last one here. Again, they're all mentioned. There's name, there's values, there's expiry, there's path, domain, secure, and true. So they're all in there. He does this program here where you can set your favorite font, and you can set your favorite or font size and font color, and you click set my preferences. All right. And I believe he does that, and then he says you can log out now and you can log back in again. And it should be, you should be able to check, and it should tell you your favorite font color and your favorite preferences. All right. Again, I've shown you stuff like this before, at least I believe I have, that when I go out here, all right, and I've got Amazon.com, and I guess it's not showing it to me now, but let's see if I, all right, if I go out to my cart, well, let's put it here. How about this? I was looking at some jQuery books, okay? And I didn't look at all those books. I looked at one or two. So basically, some kind of a cookie was set on my system for some kind of book. And then there is some kind of an algorithm that Amazon has in here to let me know, hey, stuff I recently viewed or stuff like what I recently viewed. Because if they know that I've gone in and I've looked at some books on jQuery, I might be interested in buying some books on jQuery. And have you ever noticed when you go through this too, usually it's wide enough. Now notice there's 10 pages worth of books. All right. And it'll keep doing that. And if I click on one, I'm not going to, but if I click on one, then it'll start bringing me up like books on that one. All right. So bottom line is, Amazon sets cookies and stuff for you all the time. All right. And again, if you have it set up so it won't set any cookies, it won't. So notice they've set this up here. They've set up the cookie so you can go in and you can choose your font size in the form right here, and then it sets a cookie based on that font size that's called font size, and another one based on the color. So again, then you can get back in again, and it'll know your favorite font size and your favorite font color. So again, this is the kind of thing, if you wanted to, you could set it up that if you were going to be customizing your site, you could ask the user their favorite color. What's your favorite background color? Or pick your favorite background pattern, etc. And you could customize the user's experience if you wanted to do that. Notice here, this is all the way up on page, it looks like at least, it's not 258, it's 238, that the author says here in this tip that's on page 238, one thing to keep in mind, all right, it says cookies can behave differently from browser to browser or operating system to operating system. You should always test your cookie-based apps on as many browsers and as many operating systems as you can. Again, as I already mentioned, cookies are limited to approximately 4K of data. But, think about it. If you start typing in 4,000 characters, you can type in quite a bit in there, all right? Again, set cookie places cookie data in the cookie array, $_cookie. And I may have shown that before as cookies, so it's not, it's cookie. My error, sorry about that. So again, to retrieve it, there's not a get. You have to actually key in your code. And the author says, very similar to what I'd shown you here. If is set. All right. Here's turning up here to page 242, is it? Yeah, 242. Here's again the other parameters that you can have with set cookie. So far, Element has only talked about name and value, but again, there's expiration, path, domain, secure, and HTTP only. All right, I just showed you where those were out on php.net. Says for security purposes, again, you can set a 5 or 10 minute expiration time on a cookie and have the cookie resent every time the page, or a new page, for every new page the user visits. That's probably a little bit more security. Okay. When you delete a cookie, again, when you want to delete it, you just set its value to a time in the past. Okay. It says although a cookie automatically expires when the user's browser is closed, or when the expiration time is met, that isn't actually, this isn't true. When you set up a cookie, you can give it a time in the future, and then it won't automatically expire when the browser closes. All right, so if I create a cookie and I tell it to expire in a year, it's there for a year. All right, unless I clear all my cookies or I I literally put some code in there to remove it. So again, here's an example right there. Can somebody tell me, looking at that, and I don't think it's in here, which is good, all right, what does that mean to say time parenthesis parenthesis minus 600? What is that? What's the 600? What's the 600? That's, you're just about there. How many minutes are in a second? Or how many seconds are in a minute, I should say? 60, right? So saying minus 600 will tell it to expire at a time that was 10 minutes ago. So that's setting the cookie, all right? And you're setting its expiration date to 10 minutes ago, which means that it should automatically expire then. And they run through that in here. They had you set up the font size and the font color cookies, and then they have you remove them. Okay. All right. That brings us to sessions. All the way up to page 248. As it says there, a session like a cookie provides a way for you to track data. The difference between the two is significant. The cookie stores the data on the client, all right, in the web browser. The session stores it on the server. As mentioned right there, because of these differences, sessions have numerous benefits over cookies. They're generally more secure, they allow you to store more information, and they can be made to work even if the user doesn't accept cookies in the browser. Now, this is a little weird. If you look at this one right here that's in blue, It says sessions can be made to work even if the user doesn't accept cookies in the browser. Well, how do you do that? Literally, that session ID, which is the key to the session, it's like about a 40 character something that looks, well, we'll see one in just a minute. That actually does get written out to a cookie. Even if the user doesn't allow cookies, there's a special override that allows you to put the session ID there in a special cookie. When you start a session, PHP generates a random session ID, and we'll see one in just a minute. All right? It says so that every PHP script on a site can associate the same session ID with the user, the session ID must be tracked as well. By default, it's sent to the web browser as a cookie. Subsequent pages use this cookie to retrieve the session ID and access the information. So it's something that looks like this, that you see in blue. That literally is a session ID right there. If I set up a session and I get that ID, and John's a mischievous guy who's looking on the web and manages to find that, it should never be sent in clear text, and it should never be sent directly over the web, but for some reason, let's say it is. And he grabs that. All right? Now basically he starts up a session, he tracks it down, he figures out, oh, this is where Jeff got in, etc., etc. All right? He can become me. I watched a thing online this morning. Somebody sent me this link from Facebook, and I was looking at it, and to be honest with you, it was scary. This guy bought this thing for his iPhone, and you may or may not have heard of this already, and I think he said it was about 30 bucks. And he hooked it onto his iPhone, and when he did, it was a heat sensor, okay? And it was a heat sensor, and what he was able to do was he acted like he was on the phone, and he made sure the person in front of him in line was somebody who was using their debit card, okay? So they put the debit card in there, and what do they have to do when they put in their debit card? You have to put in your PIN number, right? So what he did, this thing was an infrared camera. And what he did, he didn't scan anything. He took a picture. He acted like he was on his phone, but he took a picture with his phone of that using his infrared stuff that he hooked onto his camera. What that showed were the 4 digits with the PIN. And to make it even nicer, the infrared camera, typically the one you press last, is the darkest one in infrared. So he knew the 4 digits, and he knew the first one. So it was a matter of making 6 different checks, and then he knew that person's PIN number. And they said, well, how does this work? So he showed it. He showed himself. He took a picture of himself sitting on the couch. Okay? Then he took first he took a blank picture of the couch. Then he took a picture of him sitting on the couch. You couldn't see anything. Then he took a picture of him being off the couch with that infrared camera. You could tell exactly where he was sitting. You know, again, as people who write security code get smarter, so do the people who want to do bad things with security. All right? I heard yesterday, I don't remember which one of you it was, somebody, I think it was one of the first year students, it was Caleb. He was saying that he read something online where the newest company to get breached was Dairy Queen. And he and Mike were having an argument over who would want to go into Dairy Queen to find out, because if you go to Dairy Queen, you're probably not a real rich person anyway. But you're probably a more rich person than somebody who goes to McDonald's because Dairy Queen's more expensive. All right? And a lot of people who go to Dairy Queen, how do they pay for their meals? They pay for it with a debit card. And it's the same kind of thing. They want your information. They don't care where they get it from. They just want your information. All right. The key thing to doing this is what you're going to see when you start to create a session is this. The first thing you're going to have in your PHP code is something that says session_start, which starts a session. Once you've done that, you can go in and start creating session variables like these. And when you create session variables like those, all right, if I'm on page 1, of my, let's just say my home page in PHP, all right, and I've got session start at the top, and I've got these 2 lines of code in there. Now, I go to page 2 of PHP. And I put session start near the top there. That means these variables now, $ session first name and $session _ session age are now going to be available on that page. And any page which says session start at the top. Does that make sense? This is the most secure way of taking page data and being able to transmit it from page to page. All right. Each time a value is assigned to a session array, PHP writes that data to a temporary file stored on the server. All right, it says to begin with, they rewrite the login script from the last chapter, and they rewrite it using sessions. So again, notice what they have here. The first thing is session start. Then they set up the email. Then they set up the time. All right, why? So after you go through and you start to do this stuff, then what's going to end up happening is when you go to another page, you're going to be able to access both the person's email address and the time they logged in. So if we look real closely here, notice what they have. They're using an include file. All right, some introductory text. They're checking to see whether or not you posted. In other words, whether or not you click the submit button. They check to make sure you put a value in the email field and the password field. All right, then they start the session. Okay. Notice that no HTML has yet been written to the system. No HTML has been written. All right, since no HTML has been written, you can do the session start right there. Then they set up the email and they set up the post. And please, I'm going to take off the headset for a second, but please take a look. I'll try to talk louder, but take a look on your screen here. Think about why they want to set this up here. Would you agree, looking at this, that if all these checks pass, you now have a value, all right? You will have a value in your email field, and you'll have a value in your logged in field. Does that make sense? Because if they didn't pass previously, you would have caught them up here someplace. If it's empty, you would have caught it down in the else. So if you get into this, you know you've got a valid value in the email and in the time logged in. They've been set. They're correct. I shouldn't say they're correct. They've been set and they're valid. So now we start up a session. We copy those in. All right? So now that information is going to be available. All right? Now what we do is we do that OBN clean, which you may or may not remember from the other day, which means now we can start writing out HTML because we buffered everything we've been doing previously. Let me go back to the beginning of that in just a second. But now, remember what this does? I'm asking, do you remember what this does? This is like a go-to which sends us to the welcome page. All right? When it gets done with the welcome page, it automatically comes back to this page. It doesn't show you that, but it does it. So you put exit there, which means when you come back to this page, get the heck out of this page. All right? So at the beginning of this particular file, and I started on line 13 rather than at the beginning, but at the beginning right here, the first thing that we did was we came in here and we defined our title. We did an include file. In that include file, they're going to do that OB start, output buffering start. All right? Then they're coming in here and it says, now you can print the introductory text. It's printed, but since we said OB start, it's printing it out to a buffer area. All right? Now we come through here and we do all this. Boom, we do all our good stuff. We check to make sure that it's been posted, etc., etc. But now we're coming in here, and that's where we're setting up the session. And if you don't set a session up in the right place, so typically if you try setting up session variables before the values that you're setting the session variables have been set, before they've been set, your session variables are either going to hold an empty string or 0, which is almost never going to be what you want them to have. So please take the time to look at the last 5 or 6 pages in this chapter. All right? Because with the work that we're going to do very little with cookies, but we're going to do a lot with sessions. All right? So if you hit that else down there, that means that you either left the email empty or you left it, you didn't set the time or something got screwed up. Whatever it was, email or password, I guess it is. All right? Otherwise, he's using it in here as an else. We haven't been using an else, but you can. that else right there on line 42, that goes with this if right there. All right? So that says, has the form been submitted? So if you hit that else that's down here, that means the form has not yet been submitted. So it says, show the form. All right? Which is what we're doing right there. All right? Then we include the footer on the bottom. It's the same thing that he had in a previous chapter. All right. So session variables can appear on the left-hand side or on the right-hand side of an equal sign. They appear on the left-hand side of an equal sign when you're setting them. They appear on the right-hand side of the equal sign when you're taking their value and setting that equal to something else. All right? And that's what the author talks about in this accessing session variables thing that starts on page 252. So notice he's actually printing out some values here. $_session. All right, I'm going to grab this line of code that he's got right here. Oops. All right, just hit enter a few times here. I'm going to paste this in. All right. So he has this. This should print out. All right, he's just using your email address. So he's going to print that out. So mine would say, hello, jscott@blackhawk.edu. All right, which is totally fine. That'll work just fine. But there is absolutely nothing wrong with you doing this. Which might be considered a little cleaner way of doing it. Does that make sense? And in this case, since I'm using the variable here, actually I don't want that there, period, there. So either doing it like that, or doing it like this, either one of those, oh, that's a $sign, sorry. Either one of those should work. Does that make sense, looking up there? Here we're taking the value of a session variable and we're setting it equal to a local variable so we can use it in here. Here we're saying we don't even want to go to that trouble. So both of those should say, for me, they should say something like, hello, jscott@blackhawk.edu. All right, no question, so I'm taking for granted that that makes sense. So that's what he has. Hello, me@example.com. You've been logged in since, and he uses the time on there too. When you delete a session, all right, I'm going to show you, because php.net actually has a really good thing in here on deleting a session. Deleting a PHP session. I think this was it. I'm going to grab all this, every bit of this in here, and copy it just so you can see it all. And in the example we're going through next week, I used this. And I gave attribution. I said where I got it from. All right. This is really good just because of the fact that what the author does here is comments every single thing that he's doing, so you hopefully at least can figure out what the heck it is. All right, so if we look at this, we want to kill a session. You can't just do this. Please look up on the screen here. You literally can type that in, session_destroy, and that kills your session. The problem with that is that little fragments of your session might still be around. And if somebody can grab those, they might be able to find out information about you. All right? So you don't just do a session destroy. The first thing you do is you make sure your session's been started. And what is this doing? I know you can read the comment above. It says unset all of the session variables. What does that mean? Somebody, come on, in English. Line 8. What is that doing? It's setting the session array, which is what $_session is. It's setting it equal to an empty array. So it's removing everything from the session array. Then it checks here and it says, okay, just go through and see whether or not we have any cookies. And if we have any cookies, get rid of those too. Then, after we've done all that, then we destroy the session. And that's being about as conservative as you can to try to make sure that indeed every single fragment of the cookie array, everything is gone. All right? So what we're going to end up doing, and we'll start it in the next class. I'm just going to give you the lab for the rest of the period today, but what we're going to start doing in the next class, and I got to find it right now, someplace over here. Let's see if I do have it. Otherwise, it's on the machine upstairs. All right, remember this? Look familiar? No value, etc. All right. What we want to have happen eventually is when you submit right there, we want it to go to another page. Okay? Now, just so you know, I mean, when you look at this code, I'll show you the code. Again, I'm going to give you hard copies of all this stuff next week, or on Thursday. Okay. This is stuff, again, that you've seen before. We've looked at stuff like this. But realize right now, you may or may not remember this. I don't know. This line right here, that line. I know you say it's 2 lines, but I just broke it into 2 lines. That says stay on the page you're at. So even if this works, it stays on the current page. We're used to doing stuff like this. We're used to saying stuff like, which basically does the same thing. All right? But what we want to have happen when we run this is if we put in valid values, so I'm investing $1,000 at 4%, and I'm doing it over 5 years, and I click submit. Okay? Well, right now it's doing everything in line here. That makes sense? Okay, so not only do I have the values in there, not only do I have the future value in there, but I did formatting. What I wanted to do is I wanted to go to another page instead of doing this. Does that make sense? So when I click the submit button, I want it to submit and go to another page. All right? And I want to use sessions so that when I go to the other page, it remembers these values for me. So what I want to have happen is I want this, when I fill this in, I'm going to have 1,000 there, I'm going to have 4 there, I'm going to have 5 there, and this whole thing with future value and this, the whole text box, it's all going to be gone. When we click submit, we want it to go to another page where basically instead of it printing like this, we'll just print out a little table. All right? Does that make sense? All right. And we'll do that using session variables. And we're going to do this in a series of steps. We're going to go through this one to make sure everybody understands it. And then we're eventually going to add the other page and then talk about some of the problems that you have when you add another page. Okay? So if you get the chance, please, I know you're getting deluged with a lot of homework, if not from me, from other instructors. All right? But go in and try to take a look at least page through chapter 8 and chapter 9 if you have not done so already. Because once we get done with this, you're going to get an assignment. All right? It's either going to be 1 problem or 2 problems. It's going to be, again, something you already did for the last assignment. And I'm going to ask you to go back and make changes using sessions. Then when we get done with that, we're going to basically start all over again. We're going to create a real simple database. When I say real simple, it's going to be unbelievably simple. It'll probably have 2 tables in it. All right? And what we're gonna do is we're not even gonna build at first. We're not even gonna build an e-commerce site, but we're going to say, okay, we want to be able to, in both of those tables, we want to be able to insert, update, and delete anything that's in either one of those tables. Okay, so that's where we'll start. Then we'll add the e-commerce component to it. Again, as far as we'll get this year, we're only going to have probably a couple pages on the site, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, because what you're going to be doing for spring, all right, I made the decision that we're going to be doing some object-oriented PHP in the 164 class. All right, so in there, we're going to take that site, we're going to rewrite some of the code using object-oriented database handling. So that's what you have to look forward to, or to be scared silly of, right, depending on your point of view. Questions? All right, so again, please, if you get a chance, try to go at least page through Chapter 8 and Chapter 9 before class, Thursday the 16th.